So far, I've had like almost a straight day on the Elden Ring DLC, so I kind of wanted to give like my impressions of like what I've played of the game so far. So far, I've been absolutely hammering the DLC. I've played loads. I don't know exactly how much, maybe like 18 hours or something. That's what it feels like. I wake up, I'm straight on the DLC, then I'm streaming the DLC. So I have played like a relatively big amount of the DLC so far, but I feel like I've not seen everything that's available. I've fought like maybe 2 major bosses and met like 4 of them. So I'm like coming back to 2 of the other bosses later on. And I want to kind of say that I think I enjoy this DLC more than the main game. It's not that I didn't enjoy the main game of Elden Ring, but I am one of the people that kind of found the main game a little bit too samey. I had like the usual complaints of the dungeons being too similar, too much rehashed bosses here and there that made the game feel not entirely unique in its open world to me. From what I've seen of the dungeons so far, they're actually really good because every single dungeon is unique. And when you go into it, it's completely different from the last one you were in, and I'm really grateful for that. I will say, every dungeon also doesn't have a boss in it, because there was a couple of dungeons that I roamed around that didn't have a boss. So maybe there's a little bit of, maybe they've took that criticism to heart a little bit of, instead of just putting like a rehashed boss here that doesn't really mean anything for the dungeon, let's just make a dungeon that tells a story and gives some items while exploring that story, because that's kind of like the impression I've been getting of the dungeons that I've done so far, and I'm all for it. I actually quite like the way it's done. I'd like to get some opinions on how you guys actually think about that, but I feel like it makes every dungeon unique in itself. I also don't think we need a boss every now and then in all these dungeons, because I think the major bosses of the DLC are like enough in itself. That's kind of like the impression I get from the game, and I quite like it. There's actually been some criticism coming out. When I was checking Steam earlier, it was actually sitting at mixed reviews, and I was reading a lot of the reviews and it was people complaining about the difficulty of the DLC, and I understand. You know, I actually do think so far that this DLC is one of the more harder ones that they have released. Maybe it's to like inflate playtime, I'm not entirely certain, but I thought I'd give my opinion on like some of the difficulty I've seen in the game so far. So far, out of all the bosses I've fought, I have fought like 2 major ones. I've tried a couple more, and I'll tell you this right now, I do think the bosses are pretty difficult, man. The game is actually forcing people to be a lot more aggressive. Me, I'm a bit of a defensive player, but yeah, the first couple of bosses that I fought, the game was definitely forcing me to go in and take unnecessary risks in order to actually clutch it out. That's kind of how it was feeling for me. Do I think it's like overtuned? Here's the thing. I'll be brutally honest with you. I've played these games since the original Dark Souls and Demon Souls, so I've got my opinions and set in stone for these games, and when Elden Ring came around, this is the first game in the series, in my opinion, that is completely balanced around summons. So people like me that are kind of like using a handicap for playing the game, which is like not using summons, are actually playing the game wrong. And I totally stand by this. So I think people should be using the summons if they're struggling, and there should be absolutely no shame in it. And I think it's a terrible thing that the community has like made this an issue for people, like where if they're using summons it feels like they're cheating. I'm telling you guys, the games are completely balanced around summons. Some bosses don't let you summon here and there, but they are nowhere near half as bad as like the main bosses who are just absolutely relentless in this DLC so far. Obviously the mobs are another thing entirely though. Some of these mobs are like really hard to kill. They like take so many shots to kill, and I'll tell you, like I've been getting 2-shot by mobs, but like you just have to accept that that is the way it is. I think it maybe they're trying to inflate the playtime by making the mobs a little bit more tankier than usual. But I don't know, I'd like to hear what people think about that. So far I've not got an issue with it. I mean, like the most I've spent on a boss so far, like 2 hours 15 minutes I spent on Rolana, I think her name was. 2 hours 15 minutes, something like that, and it was a hard fight. I was like going a wee bit nuts, you know, but like 2.5 hours is really like nothing, to be honest. When it starts reaching 5 hours, then I'm like, holy crap, something's going on here, dude. I need to get this one down quick. Usually it's 5 hours for me, but she only took 2 hours, even though she was like really hard. 2 hours isn't bad for a boss. I don't think so anyway. So far, I've been loving the environments of the DLC as well. I like that there's a lot more stuff to see, is kind of what it feels like to me. Maybe because the DLC is a smaller world entirely, a lot of the stuff is more closer, and that is preferable for me because I did find the original Elden Ring had a lot of areas that were big areas of nothing, and this DLC being a little bit smaller, stuff's more compact. It feels like there's always something to see around every corner. There might not be a lot of stuff to do here and there. I mean, I did run into there's a couple of like bad offenders. Obviously, I ran into the odd tower here and there that had like a shield in it, and like that's a wee bit of the old school Elden Ring bleeding through there. But that's not been the majority of the case. Like mostly all the places that I've seen have like told its own individual story and stuff, rather than just a tower with a shield in it. So there is the one off there, and I would have to duck some points from that probably. But, you know, obviously some of the stuff is still going to bleed over from the original Elden Ring into the DLC. But they've been few and far between, which is a positive, is basically what I'm saying. So yeah, I mean, overall, my first time on Elden Ring's DLC, I've been absolutely loving it. And the only bad thing that I can see a lot of people talking about is that it is too hard. And I think that's just because people aren't using summons. So if people are not using summons, they're just going to have to accept the truth that if you ain't using summons in Elden Ring, you're actually doing a challenge run. And I don't think we should be given like bad reviews on the game because of the fact that we are running challenge runs in itself. If you don't want it to be hard, you should use the summons, which is entirely what the game is balanced around. That's basically kind of like what I wanted to say about Elden Ring here. So I'm on the side of the Elden Ring DLC, even though I've been definitely getting salty with some of the stuff that has happened, but that is just something that happens with every new game that gets released until you get more used to it. Yeah. Let me know what you think though. I'm off to go in for another 10-hour shift of this DLC. I'll catch you in the next one.